Hey guys, hope everything is going well. For reading class, we're still going to continue reading Hatchet. I'll read a few minutes to each day and then there'll be some questions to answer. So as a quick review, this is kind of what's going on. Remember Brian crashed, the plane crashed, the pilot had a heart attack and died. He has just realized that when the pilot had his heart attack, the plane went way off course. So he is not sure when someone will come and rescue him. Remember, at first he thought that it wouldn't take very long because they would track the course that the plane was supposed to be on. Then he remembered that the plane went way off course and the pilot had his heart attack. So now he's just realizing that he needs to kind of figure things out, figure out fire and food, and get motivated. So here is chapter 6. 2 years before, he and Terry had been fooling around down near the park, where the city seemed to end for a time, and the trees grew thick and came down to the small river and went through the park. It was thick there and seemed kind of wild, and they had been joking and making things up, and they pretended that they were lost in the woods and talked in the afternoon about what they would do. Of course, they figured they'd have all sorts of goodies like a gun and a knife and fishing gear and matches so they could hunt and fish and have a fire. I wish you were here, Terry, he thought, with a gun and a knife and some matches. In the park that time, they had decided the best shelter was a lean-to, and Brian set out now to make one. Maybe cover it with grass or leaves or sticks, he thought, and he started to go down to the lake again, where there were some willows he could cut down for braces. But it struck him that he ought to find a good place for the lean-to, and so he decided to look around first. He wanted to stay near the lake because he thought the plane, even deep in the water, might show up to somebody flying over, and he didn't want to diminish any chance he might have of being found. His eyes fell upon the stone ridge to his left, and he thought at first he should build his shelter against the stone. But before that, he decided to check out the far side of the ridge, and that was where he got lucky. Using the sun and the fact that it rose in the east and set in the west, he decided that the far side was the northern side of the ridge. At one time in the far past, it had been scooped up by something, probably a glacier, and this scooping had left a kind of sideways bowl back and under a ledge. It wasn't very deep, not a cave, but it was smooth and made a perfect roof, and he could almost stand it under the ledge. He had to hold his head slightly tipped forward at the front of it to keep from hitting the top. Some of the rock had been scooped out, had also been pulverized by the glacial action, turned into sand, and now made a small sand beach that went down to the edge of the water, in front and to the right of his overhang. It was his first good luck. No, he thought. He had good luck in the landing, but this was good luck as well, luck he needed. All he had to do was wall off part of the bowl and leave an opening as a doorway, and he would have a perfect shelter, much stronger than a lean-to and dry because the overhang made a waterproof roof. He crawled back in under the ledge and sat. The sand was cool here in the shade, and the coolness felt wonderful to his face, which was already starting to blister, and get especially painful on his forehead with the blisters on top of the swelling. Remember he had sunburned his face those first couple days and had blisters? He was also still weak. Just the walk around the back of the ridge and the slight climb over the top had left his legs rubbery. It felt good to sit down for a bit under the shade of the overhang in the cool sand. And now, he thought, if I had just something to eat. Anything. And when he had rested a bit, he went back down to the lake and drank a couple of swallows of water. He wasn't all that thirsty, but he thought the water might help to take the edge off his hunger. It didn't. Somehow the cold lake water actually made it worse, sharpened it. He thought of dragging in wood to make a wall on part of the overhang and picked up one piece to pull up, but his arms were too weak, and he knew then that it wasn't just the crash and injury to his body and head, it was also that he was weak from hunger. He would have to find something to eat. Before he did anything else, he would have to find something to eat. But what? Brian leaned against the rock and stared out at the lake. What in all of this was there to eat? He was so used to having food just be there, just always being there when he was hungry, when he went to the icebox, or to the store, or sat down at a meal with his mother. Oh, he thought, remembering a meal now. Oh, it was the last Thanksgiving, last year, the last Thanksgiving they had as a family before his mother demanded the divorce, and his father moved out in the following January. Brian already knew the secret, but did not know it would cause them to break up, and thought it might work out, the secret that his father still did not know, but that he would try to tell him, maybe when he saw him. The meal had been turkey, and they cooked it in the backyard, in the barbecue over charcoal with the lid down tight. His father had put hickory chips on the charcoal, and the smell of the cooking turkey and the hickory smoke had filled the yard. When his father took the lid off, smiling, the smell had come out with his unbelievable, and when they sat to eat the meat was wet with juice, and rich, and had the taste of the smoke in it. He had to stop this. His mouth was full of saliva, and his stomach was twisting and growling. What was there to eat? What had he read or seen that told him about food in the wilderness? Hadn't there been something? A show? Yes, a show on television about Air Force pilots and some kind of course they took, a survival course. All right, he had the show coming into his thoughts now. The pilots had to live in the desert. They put them in the desert down in Arizona or someplace, and they had to live for a week. They had to find food and water for a week. For water, they made a sheet of plastic into a dew-gathering device, and for food, they ate lizards. That was it. Of course, Brian had lots of water, and there weren't too many lizards in the Canadian woods that he knew. One of the pilots had used a watch crystal as a magnifying glass to focus the sun and start a fire so they didn't have to eat the lizards raw. But Brian had a digital watch without a crystal broken at that, so the show didn't help him much. Wait, there was one thing. One of the pilots, a woman, had found some kind of beans on a bush, that she had used them with her lizard meat to make a little stew in a tin can she had found. Bean lizard stew. There weren't any beans here, but there must be berries. There had to be berry bushes around. Sure, the woods were full of berry bushes. That's what everybody always said. Well, he'd actually never heard anybody say it, but he felt that it should be true. There must be berry bushes. He stood and moved out into the sand and looked up at the sun. It was still high. He didn't know what time it must be. At home, it would be 1 or 2 if the sun were that high. At home, at 1 or 2, his mother would be putting away the lunch dishes and get ready for her exercise class. No, that would have been yesterday. Today, she would be going to see him. Today was Thursday, and she always went to see him on Thursdays. Wednesday was the exercise class, and Thursdays she went to see him. Hot little jets of hate worked into his thoughts, pushed once, moved back. If his mother hadn't begun to see him and forced the divorce, Brian wouldn't be here now. He shook his head, had to stop that kind of thinking. The sun was still high, and that meant he had some time before darkness to find berries. He didn't want to be away from his, he almost thought of it as home, shelter when it came to be dark. He didn't want to be anywhere in the woods when it came to be dark, and he didn't want to get lost, which was a real problem. All he knew in the world was the lake in front of him, and the hill at his back and the ridge. If he lost sight of them, there was a really good chance that he could get turned around and not find his way back. So he had to look for berry bushes, but keep the lake or the rock ridge in sight at all times. And that's where we'll stop for today. The second part of your assignment is to go on and answer the questions about what we just read, and we'll see you again tomorrow.